like to start by acknowledging that we are acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are gathering today, and to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in our session today. My name is Kirk Strongolani and I'm here in the ACT. I'm the ACL-ACT president, and I also do work with ACL at the national level as well. So I'll be facilitating your session for today. Before I introduce our speakers, just a quick couple of housekeeping points. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Q&A icons. So please use the chat to connect with each other throughout the session, to share your thoughts or any insights that you might have on what we're listening to. And if you have any questions for our speakers, there's also the Q&A. So if you can put anything in the Q&A session there. Okay, any Q&As you have into the Q&A tab, and I'll relay them to the speakers when we get time after their presentation. So I'd like to introduce our speakers today. So we have Joanne Gleeson from Monash University and Penny DeWale from Dalby State School. The abstract, hopefully people have been able to read. The abstract says that educators' effective use of research to contribute to school performance excellence is gaining international attention. However, there remains little in-depth understanding, particularly in Australia, about the ways in which research can be improved and the role that collaboration can play in this process. And I think that's a brief discussion Joe and Penny and I were having just before the session started. So this presentation is in two parts. First, a model of collaborative research use is proposed based on the Monash Q Project's recent survey and interview findings from nearly 500 Australian educators. This is about what it means to use research well. And second, a senior leader from a Q Partner school presents her story of the importance of relationships and collaborations in engaging educators around a research-informed practice improvement initiative. The presentation is aimed to inform school leaders about the different ways in which collaboration can be facilitated to support improved research use within their schools. So I hope you're all looking forward to this session. I definitely am. And I'll hand over now to Joanne and Penny.
Thanks, Kirk. I'm Jo, and I'm a research fellow on the Q project at Monash University, and I'm joined by Penny, who is a senior leader at one of our Q partner schools and who I've been working with over the last 18 months or so. So Penny, you might just like to introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, everyone. My name's Penny. I've had various roles within Education Queensland for the last 29 years. So I currently wear 3 hats at my primary school. I teach prep, which is our first formal year of schooling here in Queensland. I teach that Mondays and Tuesdays, and I'm the head of department curriculum the other 3 days of the week, and I'm currently acting deputy principal for those 3 days. So I'm a little bit busy at the moment in my school.
As always, as always. Before we start today, we'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, as Kirk did, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We also accept the invitation in the Uluru Statement from the Heart to walk together with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. Look, thanks for joining us today. We're really looking forward to showing you some of the work that we've been doing around collaborative research use. Overall today, our aim is to just highlight the importance of collaboration in effective research use in schools and the different forms that it can take. I'll briefly start by introducing the Q project and what our work is all about. Then we'll hear from Penny, her fabulous story about the implementation of a phonics approach, a research-based phonics approach into her school, and the good and the bad of the collaboration that went with that project. We'll then talk about our findings and particularly introduce a concept of a collaborative research use continuum. And then we'll conclude by just pointing out the significance of this continuum, particularly for school leaders, and how it can help you put different structures or different relationships in place to help your research use. So the Q project is a 5-year partnership with the Paul Ramsay Foundation, and it's specifically focused on understanding and improving the use of research in Australian schools. The first phase of the project was looking at literature across 4 sectors: health, education, social work and policy, and looking at what were the ways in which research use and using research well were conceptualised. From that work, we came up with a conceptual framework of quality research use. You can see it in the middle that there are 2 defining components: the thoughtful engagement with and implementation of appropriate research evidence. There are 6 enabling factors, 3 of which are at the organisational level and 3 of which are individual characteristics. And there's also a very important systems level influence as well on research use. Today, we're looking at relationships. We're looking at the enabling component of how important research use, or how important relationships and collaborations are to using research well. Over the last 12 months, 18 months, we've been working with nearly 500 teachers and school leaders from around Australia. Predominantly, we're working with teachers and school leaders in South Australia, Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. We've done a survey with them, and then we've had follow-up interviews, and we're currently conducting a second survey as we speak. Social and relational processes came out very, very strongly in our data. And you can see here, this is one quote from a senior leader in a Catholic primary school in Victoria. Penny's story, I first met Penny when Penny signed up to have an interview with us following the completion of our first survey. And Penny's story just was a very, very strong story of a relationship with Julie in particular that you can see there in the photo, but the importance of relationships at Dalby State School as Penny was a part of implementing this phonics approach. So Penny, we'd love to hear your story.
Thanks, Jo. So as a school, we'd been discussing the need for a dedicated phonics program or approach within our school for quite some time. And at the beginning of 2016, my principal announced to our early years staff that we would be involved in an action-based research project with the university based around a synthetic phonics approach. All of our prep teachers would take part in the project for the first year, and there were no questions asked. So this information was delivered 3 days before school started. So naturally, the teachers felt very pressured and ill-prepared given the short time frame that they had. All of the prep teachers received intensive training in the phonics approach in the first term of 2016, with a sequence of delivery and lesson structure that was provided to them for them to follow. So in summary, the teachers taught and their lessons were then recorded and they were shared with the university via a platform that we use here in Queensland. And we then reflected on their lessons with the university advisor and provided them with support and advice. So at the same time, we were trying to resource the approach within our school because we had nothing. And we had to buy flashcards and decodable text. And needless to say, the relationships in my school were certainly put to the test. 2 of the 4 prep teachers at the time were young and eager and didn't have they had their own philosophy, I guess, of teaching phonics and what it should look like, but they didn't have that experience base and that teaching it for so many years and were locked into their thinking. So they were eager and just went ahead with the process. One of our more experienced prep teachers, Julie, that was involved in Q project with Jo and I, had concerns and reservations. And I was given the role as the project's instructional coach to work with the teachers in implementing the phonics approach in our school. And it had only been a few weeks in when Julie and Robin, our other experienced teacher, were questioning what was happening and why we were doing it. And they weren't comfortable with the videoing of their lessons. So I sort of had to come up with something to still involve them and to listen, I guess, is the main crux of what I'm getting to, is that I really had to listen to what they were saying and to take that on board and to have some real belief and trust, I guess is the big word, in what they were saying and help them through the process. So I had enough trust with the two ladies and a relationship that I could go in and observe their lessons, and then I provided feedback and they were comfortable with that. They kept involved in the process, but in their own sort of philosophy and in their own pace so that they felt comfortable. I became the middleman between the principal and my teachers because I had to support the teacher voice and the collaboration for the work to continue. Otherwise, it wasn't going to be successful. Julie and I became instrumental in the project and used the research to our advantage. We both did a lot of reading and discussing with each other, and we built a lot of trust and respect for each other, more than we had in the past. The research project continued for another 12 months with the support and guidance of that university, but without the videoing of the lessons, and that was left up to us as a school to manage. After the initial 2 years, the project took on momentum as it became school driven, and I think that's the real takeaway piece, that it became school driven. So relationships and trust were the two most important factors in that process. As other staff began to see the difference and collaboration between Julie and myself, they began to come on board and also began questioning the implementation of our phonics approach. The more the staff questioned and trialled, the bigger the implementation has grown within our school. As teacher confidence and acceptance grew, so did our research project. We invested a lot of time and effort and money for resourcing and training. And each time we questioned, more things came about that we discovered and more people came on board with that questioning. The first person to really provide support for us in our project was our school-based speech-language pathologist, who implemented what is called cued articulation, which is a cued hand signal for what is happening in your mouth and your throat when you are producing sounds. It's certainly not sign language by any means. Our music teacher also value adds now to our approach by integrating the phase 1 into his music program. And our support teacher for literacy and numeracy has come on board just this year. It's taken a change of role and a change of personality without being too prescript for that to happen. And she has now taken that on board and has really implemented that into our prep and year 1 space. And last year we moved our project into year 2. This year in 2021, we've concentrated on contextualising the approach for our school through a lot of conversations with our teachers. Once we had a solid plan in place, we then approached the leadership team with our plan and we proposed a budget and some ideas. Through this process, Julie and I have used our solid relationship to bring on board our other staff in the early years. Now that the project's in its 5th year, we're continuing to purchase resources, but this is done through questioning and collaboration with our teaching staff. What do they need? Where do they need it? When do they need it? And how much of the resources do they think they need in their classrooms? We continue to train staff, and this year the staff in our year 3 and 4 year levels have really questioned what we're doing. They can see the difference in the children, and that has been a powerful thing for us. So they are wanting to come on board in 2022. So the project is just growing slowly through our school just by teacher voice, trust and acceptance. And I think that's the crux of my story, Jo.
Thanks, Penny. Thanks. Well, Penny's story actually gave us inspiration about there was something going on here with collaboration, and that potentially teachers in particular had different expectations around collaboration depending on where the school was in a research implementation process. So it got us thinking about our survey data, and we went back and we had a look at it. And we did notice differences in the ways in which teachers and school leaders actually were using description, were using language around collaboration and their expectations of involvement. So what we noted in particular was differences with regard to the nature of the relationship, but also the nature of the collaboration. So for example, when teachers and school leaders were describing their expectations around finding and sourcing research, they were using words like networking, recommendations from others, word of mouth, seeking advice. The nature of the collaboration that they were describing in most cases was an exchange. That is, it was someone reaching out to somebody else for suggestions or information or ideas about different evidence and research to source and why they should do that. The collaboration didn't need to be formal, and it didn't need to be structured. In fact, some of the teachers said that it just needed to be a light touch. But as the research task became more complex, the language and the descriptions that teachers and school leaders were using started to change. And they inferred that there was a more complex or involved type of collaboration that they were looking for. For example, when trialling and implementing research, educators used words like different views considered, having an equal voice, trialling and reflecting together, or making adjustments to plans according to what the group wanted. There was an inference that educators had desires or expectations of group problem solving and decision making. And they wanted to be equals in determining how best the research could be used in practice. So we used these insights for analysing the interview transcripts, and we were looking specifically whether there were differences in the interviews then about the ways in which teachers and school leaders talked about collaboration and research use. And there were. What was constructed from our findings was a collaborative research use continuum. It shows quality research use or using research well is dependent on trust. So irrespective of the research use that is being undertaken, the nature of the collaboration or the nature of the relationship is very important. Even if the collaboration is simple, informal, or loosely structured, there must be a willing and trusted exchange between individuals. We asked a question, particularly in our survey, about what teachers and school leaders were observing when research wasn't being used well, when it was being used poorly. And that actually gave us a lot of insight that irrespective of the task, again, if there wasn't trust, if there wasn't respect, or there were perceptions that there was, I guess, non-collegial motivations, then it was poor research use. We then came up with a collaboration density scale, or a continuum, if you like. So when research was being used well, there was a different need that teachers and school leaders had for the density of the collaboration or the nature of the relationship. As research tasks moved from finding, reading, and assessing research to trialling, implementing, and reflecting on the research, then the language of the respondents inferred that their needs for equality, involvement, interdependence, formal collaboration increased. And you can see that in Penny's story. So what we did in detail then is we came up with 5 different aspects of collaborative use that were important. And I just want to take you through these. And I ask you to think about how these were represented in Penny's story. The first one is voice. This describes the degree to which different educators want to have a voice in the relationship. So when they're simply finding and reading research, it's okay for that voice to be one way or for it to be transactional in nature. And you can see then, and this is a hallmark of Penny's story, that as you move through to implementation, there becomes a greater need for teachers to feel consulted, for them to feel involved, and for them to have an equal say in decisions about the research itself and the way in which it's implemented. The second aspect is the role that teachers and school leaders want to play themselves in the collaboration. And so this is really looking at the nature itself of the relationship or the cooperation between the people involved. So again, when finding and reading research, the nature of the cooperation, it's okay if it's one way. It's okay if only one person is initiating it and that both parties don't get something out of it. But as you move towards higher density research use tasks like implementing and reflecting, there's a very strong expectation and desire for the research use to be interdependent. Joint decision-making, joint goal setting, joint reflection, making sure that everybody's on board and everybody is forming a common understanding and a common language around the research use. The third key aspect that came out, and not so much in Penny's story, but definitely came out in our data, is the nature of the relationship with external parties. Many of our teachers and school leaders described relationships that they had with professional learning providers or with university partnerships or university partners, or with consultants, academic consultants that they were interested in using their approaches. So again, some of these relationships with external parties were simple and they were just around, we want to hear about your research or we want to access your research. And so they were very much used as go-to contacts. Have you got this? Can you help me with that? What advice have you got about that? But in some cases, external partners were partners in the implementation as well, going with the schools along the journey of analysing the research, adapting it for context, implementing it and evaluating it. In that case, the school leaders and the teachers had very strong expectations that those partners would be interdependent with them, that they would go alongside them and be a part of the implementation as much as they were. There was a far greater need for the external partner to be equally invested in getting it right within the schools as the schools were themselves. The fourth aspect is the occurrence. And what I mean by that is sometimes research, and I think this comes out in Penny's story. The idea was for the research to be an ongoing part of the way in which they went about things at Dalby State School. So there was a strong need for the research use and the collaborative way in which the research was used to be embedded within the culture and the processes of the school. Sometimes though, and the teachers and school leaders that we spoke to told us that when they were finding and reading research, that it was okay that that was a one-off thing, that didn't need to be embedded into formal structures and formal discussions within the school. So the way in which teachers and school leaders expected to collaborate, in that case, it could be a one-off collaboration rather than something that was constantly brought back into the school that they were working together around. And the last thing was the aspect of communication. And by that, we're looking at the types of discussions that teachers and school leaders expected to have when they were collaborating around the different tasks. So when finding and using research, it was okay if it was a one-off discussion where there was no action or follow-up taken. It was okay that it was just, here's some advice, or can you help me with this? And there was no follow-through needed. As you move to higher density, collaborative research tasks such as implementing or reflecting, teachers and school leaders had a very strong expectation that the conversations or the discussions were formal, that they were what they called critically reflective. They wanted to get feedback from others, and they wanted the opportunity to provide feedback to others as well around their opinions, decisions, or what they observed in terms of trialling the research or implementing it in practice. There was a very strong need too for that to be collective reflection, so that they were having these discussions, not just providing feedback to one person, but providing and discussing that feedback amongst a group of people. We applied these 15 codes, if you like, these 15 themes to our data. So we were specifically looking then for when teachers and school leaders were describing finding and research, we expected to find these first column of codes. We expected those to be the predominant ways in which teachers and school leaders describe their collaborative research use. Going to the other end of the continuum, we expected to find these 5 codes: professional discussion, embedded, partners, interdependent, equal voice. That's what we expected to find when teachers were talking about trialling, implementing, and reflecting. So the next 3 slides, I'm going to let you see how strong the findings were, and that really allowed us to conclude that our collaborative continuum was standing up from a statistically significant perspective. You can see here, ask, tell, exchange, transactions, go-to contacts, episodic use, and no follow-through. When teachers used that type of language, it was all around finding and reading research, as we expected. We expected consultation, cooperation, guides, ongoing use, and follow-through to mainly be discussed or described by teachers and school leaders around deciding and adapting. This one, you can see those words, that language, are used across all of the research use tasks. They are predominant around deciding and adapting, which we expected, but they are used across the spectrum of research tasks. And last, we expected to see equal voice, interdependency, partners, embedded use, professional discussions around trialling and implementing and reflecting, and we did. So what does all of this mean? Well, all of this means is collaboration is incredibly important to teachers and school leaders when using research. That's what they're telling us. They want to make sense of research, they want to use it, and they want to reflect on it with others. So that's the first thing. If you were a school leader and you were looking to use research either more or better in your school context, then collaboration is super important. But what our data is also telling us, and I think that this is critical for school leaders, and we've certainly found this when we've been doing follow-ups with school leaders, collaboration doesn't need to always be formal. It doesn't need to always be structured. It doesn't need to always be in the form of a professional learning community or a professional learning network. Understanding that collaboration looks different when finding and reading research versus trialing, implementing it, and reflecting on it is really important. It means that school leaders can differentiate the types of initiatives or types of relationships that they enable within their schools. If looking for research and looking to make sense of research could be as simple as just extending the networks that the school has as a whole or individuals have. Yet when implementing it, formal structures need to be put in place. Penny's story is an excellent example of the need for collaboration to be more intense, for more people to be involved, for more people to be respected and listened to for those research use tasks. From a research perspective, these insights really give us a far greater understanding of what research use looks like in schools and what teachers and school leaders are looking for in terms of help to use research more and better within their schools. These insights help system leaders like state education departments, universities, professional learning providers. It allows us to understand how we can tailor and differentiate different interventions and resources to support the different needs that teachers and school leaders have for different research tasks. I'm going to hand it back to Penny and get her perspective on what she feels these insights help with at a school level.
Thanks, Jo. Implementing a new research-informed practice had its challenges, and it does in any school, but a lot of challenges in my school. The expectation of high-density collaboration at the beginning wasn't met for our staff, as my principal, as lovely as she is, was behaving in a low-density way by limiting the voices of her staff. She had a vision, but the vision takes time, and we needed to take time for our staff. This led to the research being met with a lot of resistance at the beginning, and I think most of that was due to a lack of equal decision making that was shown in Jo's previous slide. Because of the mismatch in the initial stages, the research use was very poor. My staff felt rushed, ill-prepared and blindsided. I worked on building relationships and listening to both student and teacher voice, and took the time to slow down and adapt the project as we went. So hence my first practical tip of take things slowly, crawl before you walk. You really need to consider the context of your school, your staff and your students. Low, medium or high density collaboration are not bad by themselves. The collaboration needs and expectations are reflective of the research use and your task at hand. If teachers are looking to identify the research, then you need to start in that low density collaboration space. That's all that's required. And we were there at the beginning. But if research is being implemented, as it was and still is at my school, then you need that high density collaboration at many stages. So today I can sit here and say I'm very happy that we are mostly operating in that medium to high density. Now that our staff feel that they are valued, they are listened to, and that we take on board their suggestions and ideas. The staff are now driving our research-based project, and it's ever changing to fit our students. I won't say it's been easy, but it's certainly been worth it. So communication and relationships are your building blocks, and they are the key to everything. In low density, when you're looking at finding and reading your research, people need time in this phase, as it's crucial to allow them to prepare and to become equipped with the research and the ideas and where you're heading. They need time to question. Some staff may require extra attention and support in this process, but be careful with your timing. It may be necessary to make a change through your collaborative research, but ensure you choose a time when everyone can prepare themselves for what is ahead in that low density phase. Sustainable change cannot be reached if you move away from that one voice that may be driving the agenda at the beginning. So for us, it was our principal. She was driving that agenda very strongly, and she believed in the research and she wanted it to be done very quickly. But we had to move away from that one voice because it was bigger than her. It was about our students and our staff. So that's a very crucial point. In that medium density phase, when you do that deciding and questioning, change will occur when leaders consult your collaborators and give them a level of choice. That's the important thing. So relationships are where this became very important for us. Our staff and your staff need to feel that they are able to question and that you will listen and that you will take things on board. Everyone has a voice and everyone's important, but being able to question is that real powerful thing. In the high density, the trialling, the implementing and reflecting, which is we keep cycling between the two phases, having strong relationships with your staff ensures that the research really becomes embedded. High density collaboration brings about lots of discussions and reflections and contextual change. Sustainability only comes when the project can run without you in your school, but you need to be able to know that it's successful. You can sit back and watch it grow and spread. And that's been the joyful thing for me as a leader in my school. When you have consistent professional dialogue, change occurs, not only in your staff, but also in your students. So the Action Research Project at my school, we really started at the beginning. I didn't think we would survive the first 6 months, but I've slowly worked with staff and built relationships. Listening to them and being prepared to listen to teacher voice has saved our project, really. So it's been going for almost 5 years now. It's teacher driven. It's progressed through our school further than we ever anticipated. And we are now becoming the model for other schools in our region. So we pushed back to our region in the beginning. We didn't believe that their direction that they were going in was the direction or the best way for our students who were struggling. We pushed back. We were brave enough to say no. And because of that, we have become we were one school in our region. We are now several schools. So I'm just proud to say that action-based research and going through those levels has really supported our project and it's grown.
Thanks, Penny. I'm not sure where that noise is coming from. I just wanted to conclude by thanking everyone for being a part of the presentation and for allowing us to share our findings. I'd encourage anyone, if you want to find out more about what we're doing at Monash with the Q project, please connect with us. We've released a number of publications so far that you might find helpful in your school environment, but certainly anything on this topic, we'd be keen to hear any views that you have or any involvement that you want to have with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe and Penny. I think that brings our session to a close because we've only got 2 minutes left. There are a few points that came up in the chat room. I think a lot of them were probably steering more towards comments. You might have had a chance to look at them. One was that the findings resonate really strongly with what the Centre for Educational Measurement and Assessment are doing at University of Sydney, informed evidence-informed data and practice. And there's another comment a bit further down that someone, this is from Louise. Thank you, Louise. My heart after listening to your presentation today is it'd be beneficial for schools to feed forward to the researchers who divide the particular resource practice as to allow for continual improvement, which I think is a fair point as well. What I'd like to say is I think it was a great presentation, the way that it's got the research framework that we can actually look at and see that the different stages is maybe one way to say it, or the aspects, but then also Penny, the way you brought in the lived experience so you can actually make sense of that actually. So you guys have crafted it really well together. And I think that's also why there's probably not, I was struggling to actually think of a question to tell the truth. I guess what I thought at the end of that professional discussion, that far end about trying, implementing, reflecting was also about publishing. Because I think when there's a real confidence with your research and what you're learning and what you're doing as well, and I think you said at the end there, Penny, that you want to share that with other schools, other networks, etc. So I think that was a great point to finish on as well, that when you really get to that level of strength with your research, that you actually do want to actually see others draw on that learning and take that model that you've developed or elements of it to adapt to their space. So I think we've really only have a minute left. So I might just say thank you for actually giving us the presentation today, Joe and Penny. I know it's one that I'll look forward to and follow up on because, as we said before, I'm doing this at my school as well. The one thing that I probably would struggle with, Penny, and you sort of touched on it, was the critical change makers and those critical influences in your school and how you actually leverage them in this space, because I've had that same trick at the school that I'm at when we're trying to get research going. There are some critical key influences, I guess, on staff, and they can really help make or break the way you want to go sometimes, but I think you've really captured that nicely as well. Look, it's 2:30. Producer said that we are at the end of the session, so can I just say thanks again? If everyone I think people have already said thank you and in the chat, so if anyone hasn't, last chance to quickly say thank you to Penny and Joe, and thank you very much for your presentation today, Penny and Joe.
Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great week.
You as well. Enjoy class.
Thank you.